So with the recent episode of Gozyuger, we just got a major plot development for the Universe Warriors being Berserk forms. Now this isn't a new concept for Toku, as we've seen plenty of Berserk forms in Rider, but for Sentai this is a very rare thing, as if it's almost non-existent. However, this opens up a bunch of ideas for the Warriors moving forward and could have this sort of thing happen to the Gozyugers. So with this in mind, I figure we might as well look at some potential ideas for future Berserk forms for the Universe Warriors. So without further ado, let's get right into it. Now first off, I figure I should establish that this is a whole new form that Red Racer got called Boso Red Racer. And this is actually a reference to an evil Sentai team in Gorenger called Boso Sentai Zoku Rangers, which are based on Japanese delinquent culture or otherwise known as Yankees. Hence the rough mannerisms, long jacket, and spiked bat. So with this in mind, any other Berserk form will be a reference to the show itself in some way. So with this in mind, I think we can figure out some potential forms for future Universe Warriors. And what better way to start than with the first ever warrior we saw, Natsumi, aka Not Taya, or otherwise known as Kyōryū. Now the last we saw of Natsumi, he was fighting Hoeru and then left with a desire to deliver his music to the world. However, he does plan to take down Hoeru at some point. So I fully expect a rematch between the two when they meet again. And given that the Boonboomger final stage show is now finished, it may come sooner than later. But back to the topic, I think there's actually multiple different paths that they could take with Kyōryū. And the obvious path to me is referencing Gira and Rakyul's relationship, which would essentially be giving him the O Kyōryū suit. And Rakyul's for the majority of the story was a corrupt king basically looking out for his own self-interest. And as for Natsumi, while he's still looking out for others, he's still dead set on making his dream a reality. However, there is another part of King-Ohger that they could reference, being the King-Ohger and Kyōryū crossover. In this crossover, the King-Ohgers basically become evil versions of themselves because a certain someone messed with the timeline. In short, Gira got so strong that he killed Doug Dead and became the new leader of Uchu, and ultimately became an actual tyrant king. And hell, he even got a new form too. Now I doubt that they'll use this suit, but they could easily grab the new cape they gave Gira for the special and slap it on the suit and call it a day. I'd say this form would basically be called Tyrant Kyōryū. But moving on, we do have a potential leak of prominent Universe Warriors, which would be Shinken Red, Maji Red, Lupin Red, Patron Ichigo, REIWA Red, Gokai Red, and Deka Red. So I figure we should talk about any of these before any other. So starting off with Shinken Red, there's a form that we get to see in the Gozyuger crossover where Takeru gets brainwashed and works for the Gendoshu. However, it's a dark form of Shinken Red's super form, so I doubt that they'd use it here. But I think that they could reference one of the villains, and the first one that came to mind is Juzo. Now Juzo in his human life was a master swordsman who eventually thrived on the pleasure of killing his opponents. But he cheated death and eventually became half Gendoshu. But he didn't die out like the others. Instead, he was destined to find the proper opponent, who would be Takeru Shiba. Now I believe that this could be referenced very simply. Create a samurai who is very noble and isn't willing to die, so right before he dies, he gets a corrupt form, gaining the new form. And I think this form would definitely give Shinken Red Juzo's signature sword. And I think giving him a retool of the chest piece might look really cool. But moving on, we have Maji Red, who coincidentally has its 20th anniversary, so we can definitely expect something from them. Now Maji Red himself doesn't have any direct berserk or brainwash forms, so for this one I had to take some inspiration from the villains. And the first one that came to mind was Wazald, or the Black Wizard. Wazald was an evil ranger that basically made Kai get stronger and stronger over time in order to avenge his mother. Now eventually Isamu does become a good guy by the end of the series, but he was a major threat for the Maji Rangers. Now I think they could easily take inspiration from Wazald's fire form, basically giving Maji Red more armor and a sword and a shield. Another possible form that they could do is base it off the animal he's based on, being a phoenix. Basically creating a whole new form based on an overpowered phoenix monster. But let me know what you guys think they could do with this one. Now moving on to Lupin Red, I think there's two directions that they could take with them. One being a corrupt form based off of Arsène Lupin, who was the original owner of the Lupin collection that the Lupin Rangers are trying to retrieve. And I imagine they'll just give them a more prominent cape along with a proper Lupin hat. And they could even be stealing from one individual and giving it to another. For example, stealing high-class items and giving them to the poor. And they could go the complete opposite direction and base them off of villains. And the villain that comes to mind for the Lupin Rangers is Zamigo. And I mean, he's the guy who started their journey by freezing their loved ones, thus making them meet Kogure to become Lupin Rangers. He was also more of a prominent threat to them than the Pat Rangers. Hell, he even split the two teams up in the final act. Now design wise, I really can't think of anything that they could take from Zamigo besides maybe the hat or the cloak. And I definitely think it would be cool to see him gain some sort of ice-based power with this. Hell, it could make them more stealthy or get away easily. Now I could also see them basing it off the head honcho of the Ganglers, Dog Ranio. And I could really see them going hard with a Lupin Red power-up with this, like imagine the chains are included with this power-up. But I think this power-up would actually be better for the Pat Rangers as his suit does have chains and police officers use chains. And I think those could be used in combat really well. Plus it could reference a corrupt cop or even play into Noel's role of being a double agent. Now looking at Ranger, my instinct was to try to mirror Red Racer. So I looked at the villains. And right off the bat, I looked at the Three Stooges, but they felt very similar to the Zoku Rangers. So I looked at the other villains, and the one that came to mind was Ryo's rival, Jin Matoba. And I can definitely see them taking inspiration from this guy in some way. Though I personally think it would be more in spirit rather than design. Now Jin is known to be a master in all martial arts, but he was also an assassin. So maybe this guy gets corrupted and he starts attacking random people, not killing them because this is a kid's show, but attacking them. So basically the Gozyugers would have to defeat him in order to stop him. But I do think that they could possibly reference him, it would just be a minor reference to him. Maybe giving Ryu Red a black gi with red highlights. But moving on, we have the man that everyone loves, Gokai Red. Now I think Gokai Red could have the coolest design for an evil counterpart. I mean the villain pirate designs in One Piece are just really cool. Just look at the entirety of the Blackbeard pirates. Now strange enough, the Gokaigers already had an evil design in the Go Busters crossover, though they were never actually in suit. But they went with a full pirate noir aesthetic. And I can see them easily taking some aspects of this design and putting it into a power-up suit. But I think there's a better design that they could go for, and it would be way more symbolic. And for that, I point towards Bosco. I think taking some inspiration from Bosco's design, specifically his jacket, could look really cool. You could easily take Marvelous's jacket and give it this white stuff up here on Bosco, and it would go hard. And it would also reference Marvelous and Bosco's relationship as former crewmates and now enemies. Though what would be really cool is if they could access other corrupt forms via Gokai Change. And through the Boonboomger crossover, we know that transformation items can be changed into Ranger keys. So what's stopping Gokai Red from creating evil forms of already claimed rings? Though this is just food for thought. But as for our last potential universe warrior, we have Deca Red. And I actually think the best way to do Deca Red is to do it similar to Red Racer. But instead of being a delinquent, they become a rogue vigilante type of ranger. So technically they aren't entirely evil, but they just have their own sense of justice. Maybe give them a red trench coat with some armor on it. This one is actually a really hard one to do, so let me know if you have any ideas on this one. But I do have some other ideas for other corrupted universe warriors that could be interesting. Now starting off with one of my favorite rangers of all time being Tokyo Ichigo. Now I've already put this idea out on Twitter, but I figured I'd cover it here as well. And I really do think that this can make for a really cool episode where Tokyo Ichigo starts out with a full imagination and creates a bunch of stuff through his ring ability. But as soon as they get corrupted, they lose all imagination and turn into Yami Tokyo Ichigo. And this would reference how Right was brought back from the darkness through Zet's power. And as he continued fighting the shadows, he ended up with this form that was full of darkness. But moving on, I also think a cool form for Shishi Red would actually be one from a stage show. In this stage show, Lucky gets taken over by the Don Armage, and gets both his Orion form and his base form corrupted. But I think seeing a jet black version of his Orion form would look cool. Now I think Shishi Red's ring ability will be the ability to give good luck or control luck, as good luck is the catchphrase of the show. But as for the corrupted version, he could grant bad luck, which could make the team struggle. And lastly, I've seen the concept of Mega Red possibly taking inspiration from the Nezi Rangers. And I think this would actually be a really good idea as they were literally created to be the antithesis of the Mega Rangers. Now with this, we could also potentially see evil Gozyugers as well, because as far as we know, any ring user can be affected by this darkness. Now do I think the changes are going to be extreme? No. But I do think it would be cool if these led to a potential power-up. But I think the one that's most likely to have this happen to them is Hoeru. Hoeru and Kuon already have a history that made Hoeru give up his ring and his changer. I think if Kuon gets into Hoeru's head after making up his desire, he will most definitely get a Berserk form that could eventually turn into a power-up form. But with that said, let me know what you guys think about these ideas in the comment section below. Also, let me know what rangers you want to see get corrupted forms as well. I'd love to hear your ideas. And while you're down there, go ahead and smash that like button down below and subscribe with notifications on. And with that, I'm gonna get the heck out of here. I'm Foul Place, and I'm out. Peace.